the Bandit. And I think it will all become apparent to the old readers. What it would feel like to a brand new reader. I have no idea. I've kind of given up. Good luck, guys. Anyway, Penric the Bandit. The flaxen-haired young man looked out of place in this grubby taverna. Also a bit lost. Roz studied him, matching him up with the hardy horse stabled a while ago with the village blacksmith, who provided that service for the few travelers staying the night in one of the tiny upstairs chambers here. Roz was another such. The horse's tack had been good quality, if not new. Its owner had paid coin up front for board for both himself and his beast. He wasn't flaunting the fatness of his purse, but he also hadn't tried to bargain the prices down. He doesn't have to be rich, just richer than me, which wasn't hard these days. The stranger was not from anywhere around here, that was certain. Startlingly pale skin flushed with sunburn, gold blonde hair and a braided queue halfway down his back, lanky build. In his army days, Roz had glimpsed a few light-hued fellows at the Riverport city in Grabyat, and been told they were merchant traders from the far south. The fabled ice islands were also noted for sea pirates, but Roz doubted this one had ever hauled a rope or swung a battle axe in his short life, or any other kind of axe. He wore ordinary tunic and trousers, well made, excellent riding boots like the tack. Promising. Goldie pulled a tube of paper from his tunic and unrolled it on his table tucked against the wall. He unceremoniously trapped the curling edges with the pewter fork and spoon and clay beaker that awaited his meal, and scowled down at it. It seemed to Roz a prime chance to casually insert himself. "Is that a map?" Roz asked, wandering over and producing a friendly, curious smile. The fellow looked up, swapping out his scowl for a smile of answering affability. "So it was claimed. It's been remarkably useless for finding my way about so far. I don't think this village is even on it." He turned it toward Roz for display. Roz bent and peered. The writing was in some fancy Sidonian script, which he could recognize but not read. The fellow's speech, too, was Sidonian, not the dialect of South Grabyat, where Roz had grown up, nor that of the neighboring mountain district of Oxusa in Tragoni, where this village lay, but clear-spoken enough that Roz had little trouble making out his words. Roz sneaked a peek at his hands, always telling. Long fingers ink-stained, none missing. No labourer this. A scribe? "I see your problem," said Roz, pretending to read. The map showed roads and rivers, or more likely trails and streams, with mountains sketched in that seemed more artistic than realistic. Its area did not seem large. "What are you looking for, if not this village?" May I?" Roz gestured at the opposite chair, and with a wave of his hand, Goldie invited him to seat himself. "Are you a local man?" asked the fellow. "Not from here, no, but I've knocked around Oxusa for the past few years." And while implying expertise, he'd have to be careful not to tempt the next obvious question. Doing what? An inky finger tapped a tiny pentagon drawn on the map. "I seek a mountain temple, very high up by the description. It might be overdramatic to call it lost, but certainly abandoned long ago." Roz's brows flicked up. Now what would he want with such a thing? "There are temples in Oxusa aplenty, but not many abandoned, and most are in towns to serve the people. Abandoned hill forts now, there are any number of those." He and his comrades had holed up in a few in worser days. Goldie shook his head. "Those tend to be located along main routes, river or road, or by settlements, or passes sometimes. For the traffic, yes, ideal. This place was more reclusive, I understand, deliberately, possibly hoping to avoid the several wars that have washed over the region in the past. Military protection can turn to military looting at the loss of a battle." "So true. Was this temple ever attacked?" "My sources didn't say anything about its ever being sacked. The failure of a spring was mentioned, also a plague or two. Such remote refuges tend to avoid contagions, but once they do get in, they race through the residents, who might simply have grown too few to maintain the place." The fellow's unusual blue eyes narrowed. One might tell something by examining the ruins. Different things get left depending on the reasons for flight. Sacking is actually more likely to miss valuable items than a studied removal. The fellow and his bad map grew abruptly far more interesting. Do you see something valuable left there? Valuable to me, maybe, or not. I thought it worth a look. A long way to ride for a thin chance. A quirky smile twitched the man's lips. I have a peculiar relationship with chance. And I was doing a little holiday. More men did not get holidays, nor the spare funds to jaunt about for weeks doing no work. What's the name of the place? I may have heard of it. The Seminary of Gramez, or possibly also the Hermitage of the Blessed Agigi. The first name might have come from village or township or patron. The second was a person, but still associated. Goldie was a gormless fool to give up those identifiers so easily to a chance-met stranger at an inn. Not a point against him for Roz's purposes. But since Roz did not recognize the names, maybe not such a blunder after all. He shook his head in unfeigned regret. Ah, said Goldie. No surprise I'm not lucky on the first try. It will probably take 5. He tapped the back of his thumb to his lips twice, a gesture of the fifth god whose odd blessings most prudent men did not invoke. So he might be more frustrated than he looked. I'm Pen, by the way, short for Penric. Canton name, to save you asking. And yourself? The cantons were supposed to be a mountain country somewhere south of Adria and Carpagamo, Roz thought. Not quite as far as the ice islands, then. Roz, short for Rosa, which is short for Rosakaji, his real name for a change. It had been a while since he deployed it in his round of aliases, so likely safe. And which do you prefer? Roz. I was Rozaked in the army, which left me a distaste for it. Which army? Asked Goldie Pen brightly. He shouldn't have mentioned that detail. But perhaps it would boost his plausibility as guide or guard, an offer he might make shortly, depending. Grabyats. Fighting the Rusili incursions, were you? Mostly. Tough work from what I've heard from another veteran. Pen was more informed than most outlanders then. Bastards curse. I don't much care to talk about it. Another overly true statement. Better limit those. But Pen merely nodded and changed the subject. And where are you bound now? Burback. The next town up this road worth the name. I have a mule to sell. I think I can get a better price there. Pen turned his map around and studied it again. His thumb came down on a spot on its edge. Ah, there it is. I dare say you can. He cocked his head. Looks like our ways may lie together tomorrow. Care to join company? Roz tried not to smile too broadly. Oh, excellent. That would give him another full day to sound out this traveler, gain his trust, and discover just what promise of treasure had brought him so neatly into Roz's ken, without appearing over-eager. Yes, if it please you. This country is rife with bandits. Much safer not to travel alone. I never do, so yes. The taverna's girl arrived with their dinners, and Pen rolled up the intriguing map and tucked it away. Roasted mutton sausage, flatbread, goat cheese, cucumbers, onions, and olives, with a carafe of watered red wine to wash it down, occupied both men for a while. After their table was cleared, Roz challenged Pen to a game of dice for a test. The man was only willing to wager olive pits for counters, but Roz made sure his opponent won more than he lost. He was as cheerful about it as if it were coins. Not a natural gambler, then, despite his fresh-faced youth, which made Roz increasingly curious about what Pen thought was hidden in that old temple that was worth his exploratory chance-taking, or maybe he already knew. Arriving at Burback tomorrow night with a dupe and a direction was looking increasingly better than arriving there with a spare horse and gear to sell, even adding whatever coin this golden goose carried on his person. Also, ambushing an awake fit man, however trusting, in daylight was a hazardous task. It would be far easier to knife the man in his sleep in some night camp on the way back from his lost temple, when he would be carrying all he did now, plus what? Confident in his new plan, Roz set the time for them to depart in the morning, and they bade each other cheery good nights and went upstairs to bed. Penric watched as the chamber door closed behind his dinner companion, and it seemed future road companion. He entered his own room just across the short hallway, prudently locking his door behind him. His saddlebags, left on the floor at the foot of his cot, appeared unrifled, so far. This deception seems almost cruel, he remarked in their silent speech to his demon, Desdemona. Which, his or ours? She returned. I was thinking ours, but I suppose his as well. Know almost about his. You did grasp that he is a trickster, yes? I wasn't sure at first, but his sleight of hand with his loaded dice rather points to something of the sort. Subtle touch letting us win. If he were a mere chance-met swindler, he should have tried harder to fleece us right then. Difficult to do when you're only betting olive pits. Well, yes, it seems he's looking ahead. Baited with your map and your tale of treasure, I expect. You did that on purpose. You didn't have to bite. Then began to undress for bed, considering his new friend. Rozak Rozakajan was a sturdy, if worn-looking man of middle height. Typical peninsular coloration of the people of this region. Warm skin darkened to walnut where the sun fell upon it. Deep brown eyes, black hair cut too short to braid, curling loose around his head. His age was a puzzle. Not above 30, certainly. Possibly some years less, depending on how hard a life he'd led. And if he'd been a soldier for Grabiat in the Rosilli campaigns, it might have been hard indeed. No particular clues in his clothing, which were the same tunic and trousers that any local might wear. Any local workman put in guess. Which, granted, goes with the sun coloring. I think he would be better dressed if he were a bandit, Ken mused. Those fellows tend to select among their spoils for the gaudiest garb. Showing off, then suppose, though to whom he was not sure. Each other, their camp followers. He could be a clever advanced scout for his friends, put in Des. What are we to do if they turn up? Our sorcery can handle a few bandits. They can't be any harder than pirates. 4, maybe, but what if it's 40? Your blue tongue would be no use if you can't survive long enough to speak. And I do not want to be dumped into some grubby, ignorant hill bandit. The pure spirit, the bodiless chaos demons of the fifth god, could not survive in the world of matter without a creature of matter to support them, animal or human. As they never occupied lesser life, fish or insects or plants, Penn had long supposed there was some minimum level of energy and complexity required for this sustenance. When the death of their host evicted them, demons were compelled to jump to the next best living creature in range, always preferring to chain upwards from weaker to more powerful, less intelligent to greater. Through this process, Desdemona herself had progressed through 2 animals and 10 human women over 2 centuries of time, leaving her a very experienced demon indeed, with some very strong opinions about the matter. Penn's grin flickered. He murmured aloud, I shall try to keep you in your current congenial abode. You'd better. After a moment of brooding, she added slyly, and while I have no doubt I could shortly ascend and walk our new body home to our wife, I can't think Mickey's would appreciate the substitution. Now there was a horrifying picture. After 22 years together, Penn supposed he should be used to his demon's bloody mindedness, but Des could still surprise him. Would it even be me at that point? I thought my soul would go to our God, and what was left in you a mere imprint. If you can't really tell the difference between, say, Leonid Ruchia and her imprint in me, Ruchia being the only one of Des's prior riders Penn had met in the flesh, if only briefly as she lay dying on that far-off Canton roadside, how should Mickey's tell your imprint from you? That is a very perturbing reflection, Des, theologically and otherwise. It would be like having a ghost husband. Ghost widow? His beloved Vicky's was a broad-minded woman, or she could not have encompassed her three-way marriage with her temple sorcerer spouse and his resident demon. But there were some uncanny challenges he would rather not inflict upon her. Good, grumped Des, was ever privy to his thoughts, though the reverse was not always the case. Hold that resolution. That being so, what say we lose this grab-yet would-be trickster tomorrow? Said Pen. That seems premature. Even if he means to knife me in my sleep, to try to, growled Des. He'd surely wait till after I locate whatever treasure he imagines I'm looking for in the Lost Temple. I doubt he imagines the same sort of treasure you do. A flicker of irony from her, which, to be fair, Pen shared. Likely not. Are you planning to make game of the poor fellow? If so, it could be a game with a serious prize. As a learned divine of the Bastards Order, my mandate of care does include the souls of thieves. So, what, Learned? You want to run in Penric circles to your forms of sheer exhaustion? Would it amuse you to watch? Yes, she a snort. Till we get to the knife in the back part. Privately, well, that. Pen thought that fight would amuse her too. By her nature, Des relished chaos. He folded his outer garb, donned his nightshirt, and lay down on the creaking cot, pulling up the coarse blanket. So what's the inventory of bedding vermin tonight, Des? Surprisingly little, she said aloud through his mouth. He shared his tongue freely with her when they were alone, a courtesy she appreciated, though it sometimes alarmed nervous listeners who feared it a sign his demon was ascending. A few fleas, some headlice eggs, a flush of warmth. None now, so rest easy, dear Pen. She smacked his lips in a dissatisfied way. Barely a bedtime snack. The most efficient way for Des to shed her excess chaos was by killing small, theologically allowed vermin, the fall from life to death being the steepest slope from order to disorder possible. But the lives of a few fleas were hardly sufficient to balance the level of magic they sometimes used. You may have any remaining flies in the blacksmith's stable tomorrow morning, and when we get up in the mountains, I can do some hunting for you. Camp dinners, after all. We may need to stretch our rations. She settled down, pacified with this promise of future slaughter. Pen wriggled into the lumps of his hot wool-stuffed mattress, and soon slept. On the road to Burback the next morning, Roz studied his future windfall. The golden goose gazed all around, blue eyes bright with curiosity, as if he'd never seen hills or hamlets before. True, he'd not seen these in Oxusa. He murmured to himself under his breath occasionally, his lips twitching in an internal amusement not shared aloud. At least his horsemanship seemed steady. You ride well for a what, scribe? Roz began, by way of lure to some revealing talk. Pen lifted a hand from his reins and wiggled his faintly spotted fingers. I do a lot of riding in my regular work, yes. But I grew up a country lad back in the cantons. My family were farmers of a sort. Town life came to me later on. He eyed Roz's skinny horse and the scruffy mule he towed. And yourself? Roz shrugged. A poor village. My family shared the village garden plots and did what tasks came their way. Dull place. I was a younger son, so there was no chance of any inheritance for me. I was a younger son, too, though I had no desire to inherit my father's land or life. Did you join the army to escape? Roz scoffed. Even as a youth, I wasn't that stupid. I was offered up by my village for the labor conscription. I'm glad enough they had been to see the back of him taken away in this annual sacrifice. All right, he and his friends had been wild youngsters, but the dusty village had been so hopeless. The only thing worse than paying a tax is being the payment. I spent the next 2 years repairing roads for the high Orban of Gradyat, which would have been more interesting if it hadn't been the same road. My term was about to end when more Rasili raids came, and the army, in a hurry, conscripted the labor gangs in turn, and we were marched off on the roads we'd built. We weren't best pleased, but camp life was no worse than the road gang, which isn't saying much, until they'd come to the actual fighting. That had been a whole new world of worse. Pen nodded as if in understanding, which seemed unlikely to Roz from such a soft-looking fellow. One of my older brothers signed up with a mercenary company from Carpagama who'd been recruiting men in the cantons. It seemed a quick way for a younger son to gain a fortune, but it only sped him to a death of a camp fever. I was glad my literacy gave me another way out. Do you read and write? Not well, or at all. Roz and the dreary old temple acolyte who had doubled as the sometime school teacher for the 3 villages around had been at odds from the beginning. I could teach you a little if you've a mind, offered Penric. Would you like to learn? Not really. Penric left it at that to Roz's relief. The road was gradually rising toward the more distant heights. Better watered here, the sparse woods thickened between tiny settlements, their deeper green browning at the edges in the late summer air. Once they were passed by a merchant's mule train going the other way, pack saddles loaded. By habit, Roz sized it up. It was a longish train with too many guards and grooms for a small bandit gang to tackle. Always the trade-off. A bigger gang could take more prey, but had to share it around among more mouths, and larger caravans were fewer. And the more men in the gang, from more varied origins, the more ugly the infighting grew among them. He'd learned his lesson about that. A gang of one, Roz supposed, was the ultimate simplification. Except it reduced that man to mere pilfering, which was no way to capture the fortune that would allow him to stop. Roz thought back over the goose's first remarks. Regular work. Not a scribe, yet a lot of writing. Some town clerk. Secretary to a rich patron. Something that gave him enough funds for his surge, yet not enough to leave him untempted to take the risks of his fortune hunting. Or else the fortune he sought was golden indeed. As the sun reached its peak, they stopped by a bridge where a stream crossed to water and rest their mounts and unpack the lunch bought from last night's taverna. Penric paused before eating to bless the meal with a formal prayer, making a tally of the 5 gods over his torso, and murmuring special thanks to the Mother of Summer for the bread, and to the Son of Autumn for the meat. He'd made such a tally before dinner last night, too, Roz recalled. Was he one of those tediously religious people who went on and on about the ever-invisible gods, who had never, as far as Roz could tell, answered a prayer from him? Penric was not inclined to sermonize, at least. Roz wasn't sure what god he ought to thank for that. Munching, Penric eyed Roz's mule, hobbled to browse along the river margin with its empty pack saddle. You know, it occurs to me, if I find this temple and what I seek in it, it might make more of a load that will fit in my saddlebags. Optimistic, perhaps, but I like to be prepared. Are you thinking of buying my mule? You might have said so sooner and saved me a ride to Burback. Not that Roz had anywhere else to go. Penric shook his head. I have no wish to own a mule, nor did I bring funds to buy livestock. Roz noted that clue. Nor am I certain that I'll really need the added transport. But I wondered if you would be willing to put off selling it for, an extra week and rent it to me? Roz made a doubtful noise, inwardly alert at this new opening, if hardly the one the goose was imagining. Best not appear too eager. I should not like to risk losing it. Whether through accident or theft, he left politely unvoiced. I'm not against the idea, mind you, but it's my sole purse for the next month, or will be once I turn it into coin. That being by far the best way to eat a mule. Pen grinned at his joke. What say instead you rent my mule, and I ride along with you till you discover whether you need it or not? Pen's brows rose. That could work well. I don't know if you also care to be hired for a week as a servant. The beast will need a groom, certainly. Or have you some other destination or constraint of time? Not at the moment. Only to outrun the threat of retribution should his trail of sold mules be followed. Diverting up a random mountain valley would hide him as well, or better, than going to ground in some village. If Roz hadn't expected this side jaunt, it could hardly be anticipated by his possible trackers either. I think that could work too. Penric nodded cheerfully. As they mounted up and took the sunlit road southeast once more, Roz thought about destinations. Had he ever had one? All his passions in life so far had been about getting away, away from the village, away from the work gang, away from the army, away from the horrors that had followed after. Had he ever had a toward? None to be found in going backward, that was certain. Over the border to Grabyat lay only the threat of execution, or, almost worse to anticipate, becoming a prisoner outright on another work gang, this time with added chains. There could be no returning to his more recent comrades either, although, if he had enough coin in hand, might he buy his way back to forgiveness? It seemed a poor bargain. As the 2 horses and a mule plodded along, he tried to picture what kind of toward a real treasure might purchase. The little town of Burback, Penn judged as he and Roz rode in, must be high enough in something resembling real mountains to experience something resembling real winters. Instead of the open atriums of houses in mild Orbis and Sidonia, their close gray stone walls were lidded with tile roofs. His eye quickly located the town temple just off the market square, by its 6 sides and adjoining courtyard, beside which lay the stable for the sacred animals. The temple's walls and arches were made charming by courses of contrasting cream and rust-colored cut blocks. It looked busy at the moment, a cluster of people milling under the portico. He would come back later, after dinner, when the local divine was more likely to be free of the day's duties. Burback actually boasted not 1 but 2 inns. Penn chose the cleaner-looking of them, then wondered if he should have picked the other when, instead of taking a room, Roz bargained for a cheaper bed in the inn's stable loft. To better guard their animals, he said, though the innkeeper protested that they would be well looked after by her servants. Penn wondered if Roz was thinking it the better for making off with their mounts in the night, but was not thereby moved to offer to share his own chamber and its expenses. Des would let him know if anything so interesting was occurring. Roz did yield to the excellent smells from the inn's kitchen, despite the claimed flatness of his purse, and they shared a less cursory meal than last night's. Penn excused himself from another offered game of dice with perhaps a more interesting stake this time, by voicing a wish to visit the temple, to view its interior frescoes and tile work, and pray for luck in their coming quest. The luck of the gods has never favored me, Roz said, his mouth twisting up on one side. Perchance they'll like you better. Penn was not, at this stage, about to even attempt to describe what the attentions of the gods were. Or yours for them, reflected Des. He merely smiled and waved himself out into the cooling dusk. The walk to the square was short, and he was timely. Someone wearing the tabard of a dedicat had just come out to close and bar the front doors for the night. Well met, sir, he greeted this porter politely. Is there time for one more prayer tonight? I'm a traveler here, and I wish to take some counsel of your learned divine. There is always time for prayer inside the temple or out, the dedicat returned, assessing him in the dim light of the portico's hanging lantern, and finding no weapons or other obvious threat. But perhaps there is a little more within, if your matter isn't long. It shouldn't be. The man nodded a bit provisionally and admitted him, leading the way across the temple hall. Dessa's dark sight relieved the shadows without Penn needing to ask. The place would be dim even in the daytime, its roof lacking an oculus to emit the smoke from the sacred fire on the central plinth. Instead, it sported a beaten metal hood narrowing to a chimney pipe, reminiscent of the temples of Penn's colder homeland. Altars for each of the 5 gods took up their accustomed side walls, and Penn made a surreptitious tally sign in their honors. The back exit was, as common, discreetly sited by the bastard's altar opposite the front doors, and led into a small rectangular courtyard, almost a light well, with the temple's more utilitarian rooms around. His guide knocked on a door clearly the divine's study and was bade to enter. This chamber was better lit with lamps and wall sconces, boasting familiar clutter, robes on pegs, other gears piled in the corners, rather scanty bookshelves, and a writing table occupied by a man in the day's record-keeping. The man looked up from his scratching quill as the dedicat announced, "Learned Egana, sir, this traveler says he seeks your counsel." which had been the right word by which to gain entry. Counsel was a religious duty for divines. This was more usually understood as spiritual rather than travel advice, but who knew how one might lead to the other? So the man merely sighed as he laid his interrupted work aside and turned to Penn, fixing a welcoming near smile on his features. Penn had been hoping for an elderly cleric who would know this district and his flock from older days, but the fellow was maybe 30. Unclear how long he'd held this post. Well, all would emerge in due course. Good evening, learned, and sketched a courteous bow. I'm a stranger just arrived on something of a pilgrimage, and I thought you might be the best person to ask for guidance. The man nodded in resignation and waved Penn to pull up a stool by the table, and his dedicate back to his duties of securing the temple for the night. Something of a pilgrimage? Agenau repeated dubiously after Penn had settled himself and proffered his given name, though not his surname or status. Just a holiday, or just a holiday. The root of holiday is holy day, so the two are surely compatible, sir. My journey partakes of both. 5 purposes of pilgrimage, as the 5 purposes of prayer, of which it is a form, are service, supplication, gratitude, divination, and atonement, the divine recited a touch sternly. Which need is yours? Penn thought it over with the seriousness deserved. Gratitude would certainly follow if he were successful. Service might be in one's point of view. The archdivines of Orbis and of Trigony, in the latter of which Oxusa was currently a district, could differ from each other sharply on that aspect. Likewise atonement. Atonement, really? Murmured Yes. I thought repentance had to come first. Which you are quite lacking at the moment. I'm thinking of our new friend Roz. Ha, good luck on that one. All of them in part, Penn said. Though I'm hoping you can spare me the need for divination. I seek a fascinating temple or perhaps school in this district that I read about in an old book. I wonder if you could help me pinpoint its location. I have a map, but it's short on useful landmarks. Penn unrolled the sade and rose to lay it out before Agenau, who absently used his desk detritus to weigh the corners. It's called the Seminary of Gramaz, or sometimes the Hermitage of Azagi. Agenau pursed his lips and, much like Roz before him, bent to peer. I've never heard of it. I'm guessing it should be in your temple's gift, unless there's some larger town nearby that claims it. Penn gestured off the edge of his map. Not really, till over the district border. Agenau wrinkled his nose and rose. Stay a moment. He exited, desk tracking his movement, off to what was possibly the refectory or kitchen at the rear of the building. He came back in a while, escorting an elderly woman servant, cooked by her apron and aroma. She smiled in surprise when Penn rose and offered her a bow equal to the one he bestowed on her divine. Her smile broadened as she looked him up and down, while he introduced himself again, learning her name in turn. He repeated the description of his goal. She, too, frowned down at his map. I remember my grandfather talking about this place. He was a carter, and he'd gone out to help some people move from there. He complained mightily about how high and inconvenient it was, and how he'd never go there again. Must the old man Zaire, then, to have given his granddaughter something striking enough to recall so many decades later. Though Penn spared a moment's concern about what might have been carted out along with the people. But the place was abandoned ages ago, she added. Oh, no, said Penric, hoping his shocked tone would entice more details. The cook shrugged as if in apology, and kindly went on. The saint was long dead by then. Saint of the bastard, they said, though what saints of that god do, I've never rightly understood. Good to confirm the eponymous saint had been a fellow devotee of Penn's. The scattered sources had been unclear on that point. If it's a seminary you seek to further your religious education, perhaps, I can recommend the one in Trigony, Agenau offered in compensation. I graduated from it myself a few years back. Penn had been there more than once, although to impart learning rather than seek it. Luckily for his discretion on this trip, he and Agenau evidently hadn't crossed paths there. It's more the hermitage of the saint I was interested in. I would still like to visit it, to pay my respects to the departed. Penn tapped the back of his thumb to his lips. Have you some special relationship to the fifth god? Asked Egina, puzzled. He has my allegiance, yes. And I his, apparently. Always an ambiguous blessing. Briefly rising brows from his audience, though no comments. They were obviously trying to guess where to peg him in this broad slot, of all things out of season that fit nowhere else. A bastard? No. A man of odd loves? No, though he wouldn't vouch for Dessa's snarled history. Criminal or executioner? No, he was too obviously not a workman, though they were perhaps not thinking of embezzlers or other more literate swindlers. Comic poet or musician or artist? Perhaps. Nobody asked. Sorcerer remained unsuspected. Good. No one he'd encountered yet in Oxusa was touched with second sight, or Dessa's centuries' deep soul density would have been immediately apparent to them. That digression here would have delayed him considerably. He brought them back to his map where, between them, they were able to rule out a number of wrong turns and blind alley-like landmarks, for which he was grateful as he had limited time for this whole mostly personal indulgence. Penn snitched the divine's quill to jot notes in the margins. Thank you so much, he told them sincerely, re-rolling his map and rising to go, and also returning the quill. I'll escort you out, said the divine politely, or perhaps prudently. No one wanted to lose small, sellable altar furnishings to light-fingered guests. Egina, his lamp raised, paused in surprise when Penn actually stopped to pray in the temple hall, and watched with curiosity to see which gods he favored, or more likely what it favors from. Since he was praying for the safety of all whom he'd left at home, it was definitely favors from tonight. He knelt before each altar in turn, murmuring his beseechings under his breath, words by heart but not rote. The daughter of spring for his daughters, Rena and Autumn, the mother of summer for Nikki's, who had graduated from spring's to summer's cloak upon the birth of their first child, and for Nikki's own mother, Idrina. The son of autumn for his son, Wynn, a god unexpectedly regained for Penn after being abandoned so long ago on a Canton roadside. The bastard for his own demon Desdemona, and Autumn's young demon Atto. You are the first sorcerer I ever knew of, murmured Des, to pray for the good of their demon. If my teachings prosper, I hope the custom will catch on. You've left out one, she said. Or shall I make the prayer this time? If you like. Touched, he knelt before the altar of the Father of Winter, another god lately added to his personal repertoire, and listened while Des repeated his silent prayer for safety. For him. He trusted the god was also pleased, if possibly surprised. Penn rose and made the rounds of the locked offering boxes, dropping a coin in each, and two for the fifth god from him and Des both. Egina's brows climbed again, and he thanked Penn in turn. Well, it wasn't as if Penn didn't know what kind of gratitude a temple, not necessarily the gods, most appreciated. He turned down Egina's offer of a dedicat to light the way with a lantern, and set off through what was not dark to him for his inn once more. And we should stop there.